I'm Chris Vestal, and this is SLA Radio. The following is the audio from Part 1 of the Library Leaders Series interview with Blane Dessy, Director of FLICC and FEDLINK. For more information about DCSLA and our upcoming events, visit our website at www.dc.sla.org.
Welcome to the inaugural podcast of GCSLA's interview series, Library Leaders. Library Leaders is based on a series of programs the Washington, D.C. chapter of SLA held in 2010, in which we ask leaders in our community to sit down with us and share their knowledge and experience with leadership, career development, and the profession in general. The programs were so successful that we've invited the original participants to come back and do it again, this time for a recorded interview that we can share with the SLA membership at large. I'm Mary Talley, President of DCSLA.
And I'm Chris Vestal, the 2011 Communications Secretary for DCSLA.
And we're here today with Blane Dessy, Executive Director of FLICC, FEDLINK. And Chris and I feel very, very fortunate to get to interview Blane again. And if you're going to make a movie out of Blane's life and his career, actually, a good title might be Blane's Excellent Adventure. He's had such an interesting and successful career. It seems to us as if he's been on a career-long adventure, culminating in his current position as the Executive Director of FLICC FEDLINK. And I'm going to let Blane explain what this is when we start just chatting with each other. And the three of us start talking, because it'd probably be more effective to have him do that. But before we start that, I want to tell you a little bit about Blane's excellent career adventure. He started out in Pennsylvania, where he was a library director at 2 public libraries in succession, not together. Then he traveled on to Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Department of Libraries, where he served as a library consultant. And there he won a John Cotton Dana Award for leading a statewide 75th anniversary public relations campaign. Then he moved on to Oklahoma. From Oklahoma, he moved on to Ohio, where he served as Assistant Director for Library Services for the State Library of Ohio. From Ohio, he moved to Alabama, where he served as Director of the Alabama Public Library Service. Still looking for more adventure, he came to Washington, D.C. to work as a policy analyst and program manager for the Department of Education. Still looking, though, he was asked to serve as the first director of the National Library of Education. Then on to more adventure as the Director of Library Staff at the Department of Justice, where he held a top-secret security clearance and was a member of the Senior Executive Service, the SES, which is unusual for a library director. And where he was also known for innovative services, he established a virtual library, a new integrated library system, created a large digitization program, and did programming and outreach to underserved audiences that the DOJ library hadn't reached before. He created a research skills television program and a lecture series. So after 10 years at Justice, just as it looked as if he might have had as much adventure as one could stand, he moved to the Library of Congress. And who knows what other adventures are still ahead. And if Oklahoma, Ohio, and Alabama don't seem exotic enough to you, Blane has journeyed to Brazil, several cities in Brazil, Amsterdam, and Turkey to speak and lecture on American library practices. I'm exhausted just saying it, let alone living it. So my first question is, I'm wondering, when you started out, were you starting on this grand adventure? Did you know what you wanted to be in 10 or 20 years? Did you have an idea of where you were going?
Well, thank you for having me here this evening to talk about this. And it's a pleasure to have both you and Chris here. It's really fun to talk with both of you. So thank you. Thank you for the invitation. No, when I was graduating from library school, I had frankly no idea what I would do. I had a very unusual graduate library education program. My primary advisor in library school was a clinical psychotherapist who happened to be on the library school faculty. And so my specialization was communications. So I had to take the basic library courses, which we're all familiar with, but I also had to take counseling, organizational design, interpersonal analysis. I did an independent study in bibliotherapy. So I had all these very sort of psychologically oriented human communication courses, which was very unusual at that time. Or now. So I had to read all the major, psychotherapists, Carl Rogers, Albert Ellis, Sigmund Freud, Fritz Perls, all these. That was my library school reading. So it was very different. But I didn't really know what I was going to do with it when I got out of library school, and I was very concerned because everyone seemed to have a career track except me. They wanted to be a cataloger, I wanted a job. I mean, really, I will just tell you, I wanted a job. And there was a job posting one day for a library director at a rural public library. And I thought, I have nothing to lose. I mean, except a 20 or whatever it was, a 26-cent stamp at the time, or whatever the stamps cost back in the 70s. Everyone told me it was a waste of my time. Everyone told me I was foolish to even think about it. You never go from graduate school to being a director. Never. But I did. I mean, I applied for the job, I went for an interview, and I was hired. And so when you asked me what was the first time I became somebody's boss, it was about 3 weeks after I graduated from library school. And I went from being a student to the office that says director.
And you had no hesitation? No question, can I do this?
I did, because I had never directed anything before in my life. I had never had a staff, and one day I walked in and I had a board of directors, and I had staff, and I had county commissions, and I had this whole world that I knew absolutely nothing about. But I learned. I read a lot of the literature that I probably should have read in library school, and I had wonderful mentors. I had librarians who I knew in the field. They were directing larger libraries, and they were very kind to me. So when something would, I knew the basics. I knew how to review and purchase books. I actually knew things about cataloging and public service. Those were the fundamentals. What I didn't know was budget. What I didn't know was public relations. What I didn't know was public speaking. But with the help of mentors, I got to learn all of those skills. And it was real on-the-job training.
Were your mentors from your graduate school program or others that you had met?
No, the way that public libraries in Pennsylvania are organized is that all libraries belong to districts. And every district has a team of consultants at the headquarters library. So I was an autonomous public library director. But I could call upon these consultants as I needed to for professional help. So if there was a particularly thorny cataloging issue, I could call on them and they would give me counsel. If I had a particularly thorny budgetary issue, I could call on them and they could give me counsel. I still had to work as a director, but I had people I could tap into to guide me through this.
Were you introduced to them when you first started? You knew they were there, or were you just reaching out?
I had heard that they were there, but I didn't know who they were. I had never met them before, and it was about the first or second day on the job when I got a phone call from the large library several counties away that was what we called the district headquarters. And they said, we want to come and meet you, we want to introduce ourselves, we want to tell you what we can do for you, we want you to know we're always available. If you need us to go to the board with you, if you need us to go to the first county commission meeting with you, we'll do that for you. It was wonderful. It was like having a built-in team of guardian angels. And that's really where I learned to do so much of this. And it really influenced me to think about how I need to emulate that and make sure that I give back. That these were people who were willing to take time from their busy schedules to help this young kid, because I was 25. And I thought, as I grow in my career, I need to be doing that same thing. I always need to make myself available to younger librarians who say, how do you do a budget? How do I do this? So, as I said to my first mentor, I said he not only taught me how to be a better librarian, he taught me how to be a better person. Because he really inculcated that spirit of service in everything that he did. So it's wonderful.
And you were this was you were somebody's boss then for the first time.
Yes.
So what was that like?
That was
25.
that was very, as I said, I had never managed anyone before. So it was very awkward at first because I wasn't used to being seen as a boss. I wasn't used to wielding authority, and I don't mean that in some grandiose way, but I wasn't used to sort of delegating to people. I wasn't used to following up with people to see that work had been done well and things like that. So it was very difficult for me to learn how to delegate well because I was shy. To go up to someone 2 decades older than me and say, please do this, was just very uncomfortable for me at first. But you learn to do it. And then what I also learned is that when you work with a staff, most people want to have that kind of leadership. I know when I'm in an organization, I want to have someone who is the leader, who can sort of set the tone, set the direction. And I came to realize that rather than being embarrassed about my role in trying to move this organization, I really was welcomed because of that, because people wanted to have some sort of a strategic plan, and that was my job.
They were looking for a leader.
They were looking for a leader, and I was very young and very green, but I learned.
So you were working with people who were older than you and probably been there longer.
Yes.
How did you win them over, or how did you? I mean, you said they were looking, but there must have been some process. I would think that.
I think one of the real hallmarks of leadership, and when I teach at Catholic, it's a real leader is very humble, and a real leader has to immediately confess to not knowing things. And that's what I did. I would talk to the catalogers, or I would talk to the reference librarians, and I would say, I really don't know this. What do you do? What do you want me to do? How are we supposed to work together to make this happen? And I think that earned some respect for me, that I didn't try to come in as an MLS and suddenly tell them this is how it was going to be because I had a graduate degree and they might not have had one. So it was really a process of working, almost very collaboratively with that staff to find out what they did and what they didn't do. In fact, the funny story is when I was first there, I thought I would help out at the circulation desk. And I was there for about 30 minutes trying to help, and they finally just said, Blane, you really don't know what you're doing. just go back to your office. And I said, great. So we were so it was, they knew what they were doing. They did it better than I could ever have done it. They knew that I had tried. And then they were the ones who banished me back to the office. So it was that kind of situation. But plus, I think this is true for anyone who wants to be a leader, is that you really have to have a desire to learn. You have to really want to get in there and take the things apart and put them back together and really learn and study. So I very quickly got involved with professional associations. I know you're here with SLA, so I became very involved with professional associations. I joined every committee I could finagle my way onto, and I just observed and read and learned, and there I went.
So you were willing to learn from all levels, from those who were above you, I'd say, in the district, and your own staff.
Oh, exactly. Well, it's true. Everyone has something to teach you if you think about it. And, I always tell people, you never know where you're going to find wisdom. So you can get it from the janitor. You can get it from, the person who happens to be at your reference. I mean, you always have to be open to the fact that you can learn something from anybody. And don't overlook that opportunity to get that aha moment from the most unlikely person that you may meet. So I've just always tried to be very open-minded about where I learn things. And actually, what's really interesting is reading fiction, which I love to do, has taught me so much about the world, and reading fictional stories of other people and how they've faced issues or surmounted issues. In fact, some of my most influential things that I've read have been fiction in terms of how to deal with life and things like that.
And is there a character that you think influenced you?
Well, it's embarrassing because I love to read mysteries. And there is a particular writer. Do you want me to name names?
If you don't mind.
No. And people love him or hate him. His name is James Lee Burke, and he writes a series of novels about a detective in Louisiana. And it's a detective who's been married a couple times. He's a recovering alcoholic, and he's got this very sort of semi-jaded, somewhat philosophical approach to life. And so he meets this wide range of crazy characters. And he writes, and he'll say, he'll express his emotions, or and I just thought, he's right. His insights into human nature are absolutely right. And so, I learn a lot of things from these fictional characters and how they either solve problems or work around issues or things like that. I love some of my biggest heroes are unreal.
Why not? You moved into management. Your first job, and you stayed in management. You moved up.
Mm-hmm.
All of your jobs, you were moving up. The things have changed a bit these days. What would you tell a starting out librarian? What would you tell Chris, who is destined for great things, but what your secrets were and how to move up himself? What would you counsel her?
Well, actually, the reason that I moved up is because I would observe people in positions above me or people in positions that were higher than mine. And I would think, one, the work that they do interests me. Mm-hmm. And two, I bet I could do that. I think I'm smart enough to do that job if I were given the opportunity to do that. What really piqued my interest in moving from a public library to a state library was the whole issue of library policy, but that's another conversation. What I would recommend younger librarians is find that aspect of librarianship that really suits you. Mine happened to be management and policy and planning. But no matter what it is, what is it about your career that really resonates with you, that makes you want to get up and think about doing it and doing it better? Whether it's the technology or whether it's the collections, or what is that passion? And then be kind of fixated on that to the extent that be willing to move. I moved from Pennsylvania, and I had grown up entirely on the eastern coast. I moved to Oklahoma because there was an opportunity there. I had never been west of Ohio, I don't think. And yet here I found myself in the middle of Oklahoma City with cowboys and rodeos, and because it gave me an opportunity to learn what I think I needed to learn at that time. So I think you have to be a little bit bold. I think you have to say, I can do this, and it's not going to be easy. That means I'm going to have to leave family and friends, but this is what I really need to do. And so you do it.
You have to be willing to take risks.
You have to be willing to take risks, and you have to be willing to be a little tough about it. It's hard to leave your family and friends to move 1,000 miles away, so you have to be willing to take the risk, but you also have to be realistic enough to know, yes, this is going to be hard. I'm not going to get home for Thanksgiving. I'm not going to see my friends every weekend. And you weigh the pros and the cons. For me, it was worth it to do that. And I will say it was the best professional experience I ever had.
In Oklahoma?
In Oklahoma.
Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, one of the things that I'm fascinated by, and one of the reasons I wanted to move to these other parts of the country, is that I grew up in the eastern United States. And if you grew up here, you think this is what America's like. And when you move to other parts of the country, your own country, you realize it's very different. There are very different countries within our own country.
Yeah.
So moving to Oklahoma it was a different world. It was a different culture. It was a different world. People had a different view of what life was about. Mm-hmm. They just looked at problems differently. It's hard to explain. Mm-hmm. And I found it very refreshing. So here I was, still in my country, but I really felt in some ways like I was almost living abroad, because it was so. Some of the food was different, some of the language was different, the way people reacted to situations was very different. And it was just amazing. And I happened, for whatever reason, I guess the fates smiled on me, I happened to work with a group of people that were just really exceptional people. I worked in something called library development, so my job was to drive around the state and visit all these libraries. I was part of an office. There were about 7 of us, and we were all about the same age. We had all gotten our library degrees from different schools. So we all had different perspectives. And we had this wonderful boss who would just say, go out there and do things. And we would get in one of the cars, because we had cars, and we would just drive. And we'd show up at libraries and say, I'm here, what do you need help with? And sometimes they would want us to come to board meetings, sometimes they'd want us to help with strategic planning. Sometimes it was the most. If a job can be freeing in a certain way, that job was very freeing, because it really made me realize what can be done. In fact, while I was there, and I won the John Cotton Dana Award while I was there, one of the other programs that I was really proud of is that we established what we called circuit riding librarians. Because some of the public libraries were so small, they couldn't afford to have a director. So we worked out a program where there could be one professional librarian who would sort of circuit ride 1 or 2 days a week among 3 or 4 different public libraries, and they all kicked in costs to support that director. So I was really proud of that. It was like the old days where you had circuit riding judges or circuit riding attorneys. We had circuit riding. The other fun thing that we would do every year, we would create a week's worth of, or was it 2 weeks worth of continuing education programs. And we would load up all the library trucks, and we would rent big U-Hauls. And we would drive, there were about 8 of us, and we all drove the truck. We would drive around to all these small towns, and we would do a day's worth of continuing education for the librarians in that area. Then we'd strip everything down, load up the truck, drive to the next town, set everything up. It was like being part of a circus. It was like a library circus. We'd set it all up, do a day's worth of continuing education, tear it all down, load the trucks, drive out of town, go to the next location. And we would do that for 2 weeks every year. We were on the road. And it was a blast.
So you developed the continuing education, you and the group.
Right.
You developed, and then you gave the course.
Right. We had a continuing education coordinator who would say, okay, I need you to do an hour program on collection development. I need you to do an hour's program on bookbinding. I need you to do an hour's program on weeding, whatever. And you would have 3 or 4 topics assigned to you that you had to create an hour to a 90-minute session. And then, so it was like a team. And then you would drive into a town, and the only place in town that could hold this many concurrent library sessions would be a Baptist church, because they have all those classes. So we would always do these in Baptist churches. It was really fun. We'd drive up to a Baptist church. We'd each get a classroom. We'd all do all of our materials. We'd teach for a day, tear everything down, load up the trucks, drive to the next Baptist church, tear everything. I mean, we had the audio-visual equipment. We had, and we'd load the trucks, and we did that for two weeks solid every year around this. It was just wonderful, wonderful experiences. I can't tell you how much fun they were.
So you did a little bit of everything, and I'm assuming that you were whatever was needed by the other libraries, you filled in with knowledge. Yes. In fact, I would sometimes I would get a call from a librarian asking for help, and I would go to my boss and I would say, "This library is requesting that I do this and that. What do you think I should do?" And she'd say, "You go out there and you do that." And I would say, "And what else?" And she'd say, "You go out there and you do that. You learn about it. If it takes you a day to do it, fine. If you need to be there for a week to do it, fine. You just do it. And you do it till you're satisfied that it's done." And so we had just tremendous autonomy to... And creativity. I mean, you had
And creativity. And one time I helped deliver a calf. That's my other funny Oklahoma story.
In the library?
No, we had gone to a library board meeting, and the librarian had invited us to dinner at her house after the board meeting. Well, when I say her house, her husband was a rancher. This is Oklahoma. So we were all just sitting down to dinner, and her husband came in. He said, "I need everyone to help me. This cow is giving birth." And so we all got up, and we trooped out to the barn, and we all stood there and helped deliver this calf. So that's my most unusual library story.
That wasn't something you put on your resume too often.
No, but it was just...
and delivers calves.
Goes to library board meetings and delivers calves in spare time. Yes. So I've just had the most wonderful experiences.
I said an adventure.
It has been an adventure. It really has been.
So you learned something along the way. You said you're interested in policy. So in Oklahoma, were you also learning library policy? And
yes, because here's what I learned in my first management job. That is, a lot of what we did in those public libraries was the direct result of decisions made in the state capitals, either in state law or state regulation or federal law or federal regulation. And I was intrigued by the fact that here I was in this public library, and a lot of what I thought I should do or could do was bounded by decisions being made by these librarians in the state capitol. And I thought, well, that's really interesting that they can do that, and that whereas my responsibility is one county, their responsibility is the entire state. And I thought I love that idea that you could somehow have conversations about improving libraries on a statewide level. How do we move 300 libraries forward in some sort of a fashion? So I knew that after being a public library director, I knew I wanted to work at the state level. I knew I wanted to be in a position where I could look out over an entire state and say, what needs to be done here? And so that's what really prompted me to go to Oklahoma, is I wanted to get into that state level policy making setting. And then when I was at the state level, of course, I learned a lot about the federal government, because a lot of the federal money and the federal law is all funneled through the state libraries. So then I became fascinated with, well, gee, now I'm at the state level, and I can see how dependent I am upon the federal government. So I just kept going, right? I kept wanting to see behind the next curtain.
Right. You were increasing impact. Impact first at the local, very local level.
State, and then national.
Regional.
And I've always been intrigued by that intersection of those three levels of government and how they sometimes work together and sometimes they work at cross purposes.
Right.
In their program. So that's my real area of interest, is sort of policy and things like that.
And making things work.
And making things work. And making things better. Really making things better.
So was there something that you made better that you feel particularly proud of?
Well, I do feel really good about starting the National Library of Education. That had never existed before, and I had to create that from scratch with only a piece of legislation as a blueprint.
No small task.
No small task.
Where did you start? Where did you start?
Where did I start? Well, first of all, I really started by really reading the legislation in detail, to the point where I could probably recite the legislation if I had to, because I knew that everything that needed to be done was in there somehow. And I also knew that my major justification for explaining why things had to be done was in there. So I really needed to feel very conversant with that legislation. So I really studied it religiously, because I didn't want to miss a single word for what I could maybe extract from it. Then I began to look around and look for other resources that I could begin to pull into. There was a library at the Department of Education, but it was just sort of an agency library. So the idea here was to take that and make it go national. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I saw that was similar to what I was doing was the ERIC program, which had always been a separate little database project. And I thought, if I'm going to be a national library, I need that program. So I went and lobbied for the ERIC program to be transferred to me, and it was. So that really helped us have that national perspective.
Who was responsible for that?
For
ERIC moving over to the Department of Education.
Well, it wasn't the Department of Education, but in another part. So I sort of begged, pleaded, cried until they reassigned the ERIC program to me. And because it just made sense, from not only from sort of a national service perspective, but who could understand the management of a program like ERIC better than a librarian? Whereas before it had been managed by an education professional who knew nothing about taxonomy or service or any of those things. So it took some finagling, but we got the biggest part was sort of looking around at what I could beg, borrow, and steal to cobble together an organization that would live up to the legislation. So it was
a great challenge.
It was a great challenge, and it was. But again, people respond to challenges, and I think people want to be a part of an adventure. You said that my life's an adventure. Well, I think people want to be a part of that adventure. If you can say, look, this is going to be really hard work, but it's going to have tremendous payoff. We'll shed some tears, but we'll have a lot of fun along the way. And if we work like hell, it's going to be great. And people buy into that. People say, yeah, I think I want to be a part of that. Mm-hmm. And so I guess one of the lessons as a leader, you never stop selling that vision.
Right.
I mean, you sort of, and that doesn't mean the vision can't shift and morph over time, but you've got to keep people hooked on that vision.
And you have to have it. You have to have it to begin with.
You have to have it, and you have to be able to convince people that you're passionate about it in some way. That it really makes a difference what you're talking about. That it isn't just a job. It's like frankly, I put in very long hours. In all my jobs, I've often worked 7-day weeks, 10 and 12-hour days. I mean, this is not like an 8-to-5 job. But if you believe in it passionately enough, you do it. Right. And of course, the mystery to me is why people aren't passionate. Because I meet people and it looks like they're going through the motions, and it's like, well, where's your passion? I mean, if you're not passionate about this, why are you here?
Why do it?
Why do it? If this doesn't, resonate with you somewhere inside, I don't know why you're doing this.
Is that what you look for when you hire people?
Yes. In fact, when I hire people, I always look for the intangibles. Now it's a employer's market. There are so many people looking for jobs. And what I tell people very frankly is that it's lovely that you have a degree, that you have an MLS degree. It's lovely that you belong to the National Honor Society. That's all lovely. But I don't want to disturb you, but the person who's coming in next has the same qualifications. So that having the degree is your first hurdle to getting the job. What I look for in people are people who can convince me that I can't live without them. Right? They come into a room. They know about my organization. They've done their homework. They have ideas. They have a sense of humor. They can communicate well. They're persuasive. You can tell they're not afraid of a hard day's work. You can tell they're not afraid, if they put in extra hours on the weekend, they're going to do that. It's those intangible, I used to joke, it's the fire in the belly. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that fire in the belly, it's not going to work. Maybe I shouldn't tell this because it sounds so brusque, is that I can usually tell within 10 minutes of an interview whether it's work proceeding or not. Because you can tell by the way a person enters the room, by the way they shake your hand, by the way they make eye contact, right? Is this someone, because my question is, if I'm going to hire you, you're going to be a representative of my organization, which means I need the very best. I can't settle for mediocre. I need the best. And I need to be able to say, you need to go out there to that group of strangers and make friends for us.
Yeah.
You need to go out there to a group of people, to a room full of people that you've never met, and you need to go in there and you need to sell them on why the library is important and why they should support it. And if you can't do that, if I don't feel you have that kind of talent, I don't want to hire you. And I know that sounds harsh. I know that sounds very harsh. But that's what it takes. I mean, I've interviewed many people, and they don't make eye contact. They're very shy. They're socially awkward, and it's like I can't see this person going out there doing the things that I want them to do. If they were just going to sit at a desk and do some administrative tasks, yeah, they could do that. But if I say there's an audience of 200 people, go do a PowerPoint. Right?
A deer in the headlight.
Yeah, I can't have you become a deer in the headlight. I need to know that you're going to go out there and just knock their socks off. So that's what I look. I look for those intangibles.
Thank you for listening to DCSLA Radio. For more information about the chapter and how you can get involved, visit our website at www.dc.sla.org.